Hello and welcome to session 268 in the AIsafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing the post AI Practical Advice for the Worried by Zvi Mosowitz. Zvi Mosowitz is the founder and probably CEO of Balsa Research. He's also a professional Magic the Gathering player and the CEO of MetaMed. This is a post from the beginning of this month, and it was posted on his personal blog called "Don't Worry About the Vase," which is a reference to this scene in The Matrix, where the Oracle tells Neo not to worry about the vase that he's about to break. So, practical advice for the worried. It turns out that I am in fact the target audience for this because I am worried, and that makes it obvious for me to evaluate this text on the criteria whether the advice is in fact practical for me. I've tried to give examples of my own situation in order to answer this question. But I'd also like to upfront give some of my advice that I think in some respects differ quite a bit from Zvi's. The first one that I think is really central is if you're really worried, then you should strongly consider to actually do something. Actually try to work on AI safety. Think hard about it. See if you can find even some minor way to contribute. That is, in my estimate, likely to be very psychologically beneficial. Like you get a bit more of an internal locus of control that I think are very valuable in this kind of situation for many people. You also plug into a supportive community, which also can help and can not help depending on what part of the community you go to. And there are in fact some actions that are really easy to do, like upvoting posts on Less Wrong or something like that. Is a very simple way to contribute that I'm certain that even people who have very little technical skill will be able to do productively. So one of my key practical advice is one that Zvi does talk a bit about, but it does not talk enough about. Like you need to focus, if you're worried, on your mental health and trying to get yourself in a position that doesn't deteriorate for your mental health. And like it depends a lot on who you are and what you respond to, but I think this should be a core priority. 4 classic ways to do that is to exercise, eat and sleep and avoid drama, all these kind of things. In particular, one thing that you should think about is like, what is your financial situation? Because Zvi talks about borrowing money, but a lot of people have in fact saved up money. So I think a core consideration is how much money do you have and at what point can you afford not to get paid from now until you expect that there is probably some kind of singularity or fire alarm. A very strong lever that I think you can use for adjusting your that is very practical to adjust is what media you read. What blogs do you see? Do you like doom scroll on Twitter? I think is the term, and I think that's an important thing to avoid for most people. But I say for most people because there's a classic saying that you need to reverse all the advice that you get, because what is right for one person may be exactly wrong for the other person. Perhaps the best way around this is to do some kind of experimentation, like try to abstain from reading social media for a week and see if that makes you feel better. That's a very easy experiment to do and likely to be very beneficial. And finally, when someone asks me for practical advice, the thing I tell them is to make sure you hug your loved ones, both instrumentally and as a final goal. Now, for the text itself, it starts out with some arguments against AGI, some arguments against not being maximally worried. And Zvi considers it an open question and says there are in fact good reasons to think that we won't have AGI for a long time. And I think there are reasons why we wouldn't have it. There are scenarios, but none of them rise to the level where I would call them a good reason. The first three shows is we could run out of training data. Training data clearly has been a very substantial part of the story of how AI has improved to this point. And like we have all the text on the internet, but will we get more? Well, I think it's very obvious that we are going to see more. Things like videos, obvious training data that we probably can unlock soon. Interactions with the physical world is another big thing that we almost certainly will see more of in the future. And there are others that have been suggested. I think it's certainly a possibility that this could fail. I think humans are a strong counterexample to this. Humans are generally intelligent, and humans can in fact be trained by the amount of evidence there exists in the world. Another argument against AGI is that we could just run out of ways to improve AI. Right now, I think we are seeing algorithmic improvements, small but real. Hardware improvements following roughly Moore's law, give or take. And organizational improvements, like just larger projects. We see these three kinds of improvements very often, and there are no obvious upper limits to those. We may see regulatory barriers that prevents AI from having a big economic impact. I actually think this is very, very likely. I think we are not very, very likely. That's overstating the case. My model strongly has that once AI becomes capable of doing very important economic productivity, then this will be outlawed. And I think that is very plausible. But on the other hand, this doesn't actually bear on AI risk as such, because AI risk is that at some point the AI will be powerful enough to ignore these regulations and take over, and that point isn't affected very much by the extent to which AI is prevented from impacting much of the economy. A little, of course, because it depends on how much investment is done, but this kind of regulatory barriers will only happen at very, very high levels. Finally, we could see other barriers to AGI. I think, like, if we are not fundamentally confused about AGI, which totally is a thing that could happen, then the thing I see happening here is some kind of AI safety success coordination or some other way of preventing AGI that, like, it could be a catastrophe. For instance, global thermonuclear war would totally prevent AGI for a long time, but that's not really something a lot of people hope, and I haven't really seen anyone make a strong argument for this kind of coordination being feasible in the very short term, or other similar cases that would prevent if AGI continues on trend due to training, compute, etc., then what precisely would prevent it seems very vague to me. And so this is just the argument against AGI. There is, of course, one more step in the reasoning chain from AGI, where we are now to X risk, and that is that once we have AGI, will we then die? And Zvi says, yes, if we get AGI reasonably soon, he expects that we will all die. So how should you think about this? Zvi says you should think for yourself. If this is something that is really important to you, and this is something that will affect your decisions, you shouldn't just adopt Zvi's position or anyone else. You should think for yourself. And you shouldn't update too much about, like, who has this social process of figuring out who can I trust to make decisions about this kind of thing. I think this may not be true. Like, this will AI risk, of course, impacts everybody, and it both impacts people who have, like, a competitive advantage in building models and understanding the core of the issues, and people who are skilled in social cognition. And for these people, relying on social cognition may be their best bet. I would worry here in this case. I think I have seen a number of examples of people who believe that they have very good social cognition, and then they make very poor decisions in practice. If you claim that you have a strong social cognition on these kind of issues, then probably the people who said you should invest in bitcoins, you listen to them, right? Because if you are able to make good decisions in this way, so I think there's a good chance that people overestimate their own abilities of social cognition. And obviously, the thing you should do instead is to build your own understanding and your own model. And in this, I would personally suggest that people don't put too much stock in the outside view and much more stock on the inside view. And finally, you should decide what you predict. And I think this is technically wrong. You first make your predictions and then you make your decisions. But that may be a minor point. So how should you react to this new situation that we are in? Just reacting properly. Up front, so he states, this is hard. Most people react poorly. And the idea that, you should just contribute is actually one that is surprisingly hard. Because if you go into AI and think, I'm going to help with this problem, then there is a very real risk that you'll just end up making the problem worse. It's really hard to work on safety without working on capability, and a lot of people have been burned on this. How about suppressing the information? Is that a good idea? Well, the bad things, the disadvantages of suppressing the idea is that it's, for yourself, suboptimal. It's much better if you react to what is going on, and it's much better for society. If there is something you can do, then it's much better that you do it. But on the plus side, there are advantages to suppressing. You avoid existential despair. You don't ruin your financial future by taking on unsustainable debt. You don't miss out on the important things in life, and you don't make the problem worse. And those are, in fact, substantial advantages. Now, these things, like not ruining your financial future and avoiding existential despair, many people can do that just fine without worrying about AI risk. And I don't think actually that suppressing is as presented here as a binary choice is very realistic. Most likely a lot of people are going to be somewhere in between, slightly suppressing and not fully suppressing. And in these cases, there may be things that you can do to capture most of the value anyway. Svi warns about dramatically overreacting, making an example of this person on Twitter, who suggests you should make space for questioning if your life plan makes sense in light of these developments. I think that is, in fact, not a dramatic overreaction. I don't know why Svi puts that label on this eminently sensible statement. So how do you, in fact, make good decisions? Well, Svi has a very simplified guide for this. First, you decide what is the probability that we'll have AGI soon, and what is the probability that things will go fine, and what if we have AGI soon, and what are the probability that we will have extinction. And then once you have these probabilities, then you look at your life decisions and try to calculate, are they actually good? So I am very much in two minds about the utility of this kind of easy guide to making decisions. Because on one hand, I think if you want to make good decisions, this is a very big subject. How do you make good decisions? And the classic answer that I would give is read the sequences. And I realize this is a big thing, but I do in fact think that it's a very important topic. And one of the things that the ways that this model really suffers is that if you just say soon without any kind of definition of soon, then this makes the algorithms shown here way too vague in my opinion. I think you actually really do need some kind of probability distribution of how many years until AGI in order to make any kind of reasonable decision. I also think that if you really want to have this influence the decisions of your life, you should take the time to actually really look into this in more detail and if you have a big life question like should you have children, then you should spend more than 5 minutes, because it's something that is in fact really important. There are tools for how to make decisions with this kind of probabilistic frameworks. I haven't actually used them, so I don't know if I can recommend them. Zvi has this nice summary. Take care. Remember, it is easy to fool yourself. And although he doesn't state it, I think this can be thought of as a summary of the sequences. And of course, it is very easy to fool yourself. And just knowing that it's very easy to fool yourself does not liberate you from the problem of fooling yourself. So the big statement here is normal life is worth living, even for very high probability of doom, and for that happening soon. Why is this? Well, the first argument for this is that it is in fact possible that we won't have doom. A normal future could still happen. And in that case, to you, it is important psychologically to be prepared for that should it happen. And if you're not prepared for a normal future, then that will stress you out. I think in this case, Zvi very strongly generalizes about what is psychologically important, and to some people it may be true, and to some people it may not. In particular, if I look at my own personal situation, then I don't need to be prepared because I am in fact already prepared. And the reason why I'm already prepared is because I'm the kind of person where if I'm not ready for a normal future, that would stress me out. So even before I learned about AGI, I started getting prepared for my normal future because that's the kind of person I am. So, and for that reason, I don't need to be even more prepared. So this, in general, people who feel that they need to be prepared are already prepared for a normal life. So I don't think this is an argument why you should focus on particular on this case in spite of the evidence. Another reason for living a normal life is that you will encounter practical problems if you abandon the normal life. First, you will have problems with the people who love you. So I have in fact not had a lot of problems with the people who love you. They are in general pretty supportive, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And I think, like, in general, you could say that, yeah, if they love you, then of course, by definition, they are supportive. That's part of what loving means. But I realize that for a lot of people, like, the support of the loved ones are not, in fact, something they can count on. The second is in professional interactions. What do people actually think of you when you say, actually, I believe that AI will at some point be very, very dangerous? Well, I've actually talked with a number of people about this, and they seem surprisingly accepting of this. They think, yeah, that seems totally reasonable. They agree that there is, in fact, a probability that AI will kill us all. Like, it's, of course, an open question to what extent they just humor me or something like that. But I think a lot of people working in AI think that this is, in fact, something that could happen. It may also give problems in relating to the world. I think this is true. But I also think that you relate better to the world by, like the litany of Tarski is that if the sky is blue, I desire to believe that the sky is blue. And the same way with P-Doom. And I think that there are, in fact, ways you could, I think it's called derealization or something like that. There are psychological processes that are harmful that can happen, but in general, I feel you relate better to the world if you look straight at the world. Finally, it will become difficult to admit you made a mistake if the consequences of doing so seem too dire. And this, I believe, Zvi means that if you change your life to deal with AI risk and then you figure out AI risk isn't actually that high, then changing your mind becomes very difficult. But I think this is in fact a symmetric argument. It also goes the other way. If you prioritize a normal life too much, then changing your mind away from the normal life and the normal career and all these kind of things is also extremely costly. So I think in fact it may be substantially more costly if you believe that there is a high probability of doom to err on the side of normalcy. So, should you take on debt? Like, if you take up debt, you should realize that it may come back to bite you potentially far sooner than you think. And on the other hand, the advantages of living in a normal world, they come much faster than you expect, or that most people expect. And I think at this point, I would have preferred Zvi to be much more clear about what soon means. Because if you have timelines that say 1 year, then that's very different from timelines that say 10 years. And also, like, the best time to influence the world may in fact not be right before the singularity, but sometime in advance. And there may be time between AGI and existential risk. I think these things need to be examined in greater detail, because it does in fact matter very much what you should do, whether you believe you have on average 1 year or you have 10 years. This is a statement that puzzled me a bit. There are no good ways to sacrifice quite a lot of utility in the normal case, and in exchange get good experiential value in unusual case. Now, the straightforward reading of this seems totally false, right? There are, in fact, a lot of ways to sacrifice a lot of utility in the normal case, but then have a high risk, high reward thing. Like, maybe I'm misreading this. It's possible. I'm not entirely sure what experiential value means in this case. So maybe I'm just misunderstanding. But the classic example of a high risk, high reward option that satisfies this is to quit your job and start a company. In many cases, probably in most cases, you'll lose utility, and in a few cases, you'll gain a lot of utility. And on average, this is probably a good idea for many people. Now, that isn't in fact the thing that I would argue for starting your own company. I would argue you should instead quit your job and work on AI safety. But I think this also satisfies the criteria. You can do things like move consumption forward, work on your bucket list, and take on a bit of debt. Seems useful, but there are strong marginal returns to this. And I agree, I have in fact done something like this. I stopped saving for retirement and put it into AIsafety.com quite a few years ago. So this is something that I agree with. How about burning your candle at both ends? Well, the costs for doing that seem to accrue quickly. You'll get burnout, you'll get stress, you'll get existential angst. And I agree, you will get all of this. I think, in fact, you will, of course, obviously get burnout and stress. Will you get more existential angst from working hard? I would actually expect the opposite. I would expect that the harder you are working at AI safety or at preventing a catastrophe, the less existential angst you get. But people are different, and you may, in fact, be different. And the disadvantages, like burnout, is like instrumentally very bad, and the idea is you instead maintain your capacity, and then later a miracle of some kind will happen, some model violation, and then you are able to do something. I think this is true. Like working really hard can be kind of like sprinting, and like if you've tried sprinting, then like you can sprint for 10 seconds or something like that. So you really need short timelines for that to make sense. In almost all other cases, you need to be deliberately pacing yourself. And Zvi is stating that contributing while living a normal life is more effective. And I think it's a hypothesis that you really need to consider, that you should not burn your candle at both ends. But it may also, in fact, not be true. Like, it may be that the correct thing to do would be to just move to Berkeley and find some people there and work on AI safety is, in fact, more effective. Like, it is not a given thing that it will always be more effective to live a normal life. There are people in the past who have reacted badly to this kind of thing. And Zvi gives a few examples. And yeah, I agree, some people have reacted badly. That's not really that surprising, because like if you look over the history of mankind, I'm sure that a lot of people have reacted to things in a less than optimal way. I do think we should still take this into serious consideration. Like it's called noticing the skulls. Like you're walking down a path and then you notice that there are actually a lot of skulls along the way, and then a good rationalist will stop and say, this is something I should really consider. So depending on how many, I don't think Zvi really argues that it's a lot of people, but some people have in fact gotten burned by this. Maybe we are getting burnt. Well, it is something we should consider. Is this a local information cascade where I'm updating on someone who's updating on someone who's updating on someone, and this is in fact people updating on each other and not some smart people making some actual decisions? I think there's something you need to consider, whether there is actual information coming in or it's just a local information cascade. I think like we have now GPT-4, and I think and Palm and Claude. I think it's quite clear that information is coming in, but you should still be aware that you could be in a local information cascade. An interesting point that I haven't seen written explicitly before is you shouldn't be consistent just to satisfy people who ask for consistency. I think this is a neat point, and I'm happy to see it explicitly here. Oops. And then, of course, the more uncertain you are about timelines, the more reasonable it is to not take on a lot of debt and try to aim for some kind of normalcy. The last part is structures as a question and answer session. So the first question is, should I save for retirement? And Zvi says, well, doesn't explicitly say no, but says you should probably focus on building up asset value over time, because that is valuable if there is some kind of if there is some later information that Zvi doesn't actually say that. He just said it's valuable in both cases. And so what I did was, once I finished my studies, I started saving up. And the reason I explicitly gave for saving up was that right now we're in a good situation, and it's really nice to have some money saved up if later there is a bad situation. So that is in fact the right reason that I would condone after this. I think the thing Zvi is missing here is some kind of stop criteria, because saving up for retirement and building up asset value over time is a really good idea, but you also need to spend it at some point. Like, and you can't. We don't expect a fire alarm. So, what will be your stop criteria? What would be the time where you stop saving for retirement and then quit your job to work on AI safety? You need to have some idea about whether that is a thing that could actually happen. A more extreme version is to just take on debt that you can't pay back, and Zvi is negative on that. Is that will require a lot of confidence in both that there is will be doom and that it will come soon, and you also need to have a good way to spend the money. Like if you take on a lot of debt and then you blow it on something that is totally irrelevant, then that sounds like a something you will strongly regret. Should you buy a house? So he says maybe, like there are tax advantages and things like that, but psychologically it can be hard to sell for some people. And I think in particular a house makes it much more likely that your location becomes fixed. And that is something, like it is very possible, like I haven't moved to Berkeley. I can't move to Berkeley because I have a wife and children here and a house also, and this kind of routes can in fact be a substantial obstacle. Should you start a business? Zvi is in general bullish on people starting businesses. He just says, as long as you don't make the problem worse by doing something with AI. I think I am more optimistic about not making the problem worse. I think if you are starting a company that uses AI, then the amount of extra money and hype you're putting into AI may be extremely small. You can make it even smaller by being in stealth mode or just not hyping the business. That's what I'm doing, and I think I'm pretty confident that this is in fact not making the problem worse. Should you have kids? Zvi is positive on this. He believes they are valuable as an end in themselves. It gives you something to protect. There are a few well-placed researchers who should not, but you are probably not one of them. I think this is too simple of an analysis of a very difficult subject. I think an obvious glib answer is that, yeah, there are risks, in fact, and this may be a very good argument for not having children right now. Another is that children are just really expensive in time and money, and there is a long tail. It is very possible to have children who have some kind of special needs, and this can seriously take up literally all your time and money, and that is something you need to consider as well. I think, in fact, if you're doing some kind of utilitarian calculus here, then that may, in fact, come out quite strongly to not having children, and maybe later, if everything becomes normal, then adopting or something like that, if it becomes too late for biological reasons. I think the utilitarian calculus disagrees with this, and I think, in fact, this is something that you should really, really seriously consider. Okay, but if you already have children, should you tell them about AI's risk? Well, you shouldn't quite hide information. I think Svi is strongly against hiding information from children, but at the same time, it shouldn't be emphasized. I disagree with this in how I raise my children, in that I do, in fact, hide dark stuff from small children. I think that is, in fact, the right way to do that. But I don't hide the gray stuff. I hide the very dark stuff, but not the gray stuff. So they know what I'm doing, that it's like AI safety, but they don't care very much about that, because children have many other things in their heads. How about normies? Should I explain what's coming to them? So this is just being open and honest, but not shoving it in people's faces. And I sometimes when I explain what I'm doing, they ask a little, but very little. People generally really, really don't care. I think that is fortunate, in that I don't think that it helps shoving it into people's face. So we are lucky to be in a situation where it's both amoral and not helpful to shove it in people's faces. But that's mostly luck. Also, a consideration is if just before the end it becomes apparent that AI is very, very dangerous, then you should be prepared that normies around you may blame you. The Copenhagen interpretation of ethics say that you have a special responsibility since you're working with the problem. So how about forgetting things this and just having a good time? This probably won't work, unfortunately. It's if you try to forget about it and then just try to enjoy your life, you will be consumed by worry. Zvi says he would rather go down fighting, and I basically agree. I wouldn't work. I prefer to go down fighting also, but I would add here that there's a difference between going down fighting as part of a heroic effort that is close to winning. Oops, my microphone fell. Give me just a moment. Yeah, sorry about that. There's a difference between going down fighting heroically and going down fighting very pathetically, almost not contributing. Finally, the question: how long time do we have? What does Zvi thinks? And he thinks basically it's very uncertain, and it's also uncertain if there will be an existential catastrophe. So at this point, I should bring up my own probability distribution. I think 25% on an existential risk in 2025, 50% in 2029, 75 in 35, and 90% on 2050. But that's conditioning on not slowing down due to things like catastrophe and coordination, etc. And these estimates are weakly held, subject to significant changes, and did in fact change when GPT-4 was announced a couple of days ago. Question: should you invest in AI companies? Well, you shouldn't invest in them if they are funding constrained, because then you're making the problem worse. Whether that is actually true, there was some comments on this saying that actually for large companies this matters not very very little, but precisely zero. And I thought that was an interesting argument. What you should do instead is to invest in AI safety. And to a large extent, because it's really hard to find investment opportunities for AI that doesn't push on capabilities, I think the thing you should invest in is your own set of skills. If you have to invest in an AI company, I think a distinction should be made between an AI user and an AI developer. And I think AI users are often reasonably okay, depending, and AI developers are always strongly bad. Should you learn some new skills? Well, in general, you should be flexible and ready to change, and also learn to code, and also learn to use AI. I agree, and I think this is one of my personal weak spots. I am good at coding, I'm not good at using AI, and I ought to be better. So depending on your job, there is a probability that it will disappear. Like if you're doing like artists or writing novels or something like that, you should be really worried. But in other cases, it's harder to know, but you should really try to model it. And for me, like I'm a software developer, and like I think the AI developer disappears at the singularity, and the AI users probably slightly before, and general programmers slightly before that is kind of my expectation. But note that like a bad programmer right now is in fact like I think it's gonna be really really tough to be a bad programmer in a couple of years due to Copilot. So how do you plan a long-term career? Well, people generally do that really poorly. You can perhaps obtain capital and stay healthy and this kind of thing. You can try, but it's going to be really hard. One of the things you should consider is that if the world doesn't end, it may be because society collapses, and that is something you might consider planning for. So in general, what I did was computer science and saving up money as a long-time career plan. I think that was very smart to just focus on the thing that earned you the most money. For my children, when like I don't have a long-term career plan, and for my children, the youngest, his long-term career plan will start in 20 years, and I basically don't expect that that he will be able to meaningfully contribute. This kind of uncertainty is, of course, problematic, and the obvious question is, can you just wait with taking any kind of action? And Svi says, no, you have to act under uncertainty, and that's a general thing. You always have to act under uncertainty. You're never going to get a situation where you can make meaningful changes without acting under uncertainty. So to sum up, the key considerations that Svi presents is you need to get a good model to really figure out what is the probability that you are right, that P-doom is really hard, that this is going to happen high, and this is going to happen soon. You need to figure out, given that the world ends, what is the utility of your actions? And also, if you are wrong that the world ends, what will be the consequences of your actions in that case? You probably should distinguish between what is the consequences for you personally and what are the consequences for the rest of society if the world ends. So some of the actions you can take ranked from worst to best. The worst you can do is to work on capability or work on funding capabilities. And I expect that for the people who read this, they are probably generally not in a position where they can meaningfully contribute to Google. So it's much more likely that they should worry about working on capabilities. Working on applications and layers. I think Svi is negative on this. I think it's in fact possible to do this quite ethically. Spreading hype and just gaining mundane utility for language models, that is probably okay. I think in particular if you try to build hype for GPT-4, that is like a drop in the bucket. I don't think that will matter very much. I would notice in fact that one of the great ironies of AI safety is that talking about AGI risks does in fact cause hype. That is like one of the worst things to realize, that there were apparently a lot of people who read Nick Bostrom's book Super Intelligence and thought, hey, I'm gonna build a super intelligence as fast as possible. And yeah, that is also a risk. Jailbreaking and tinkering with the models is something that Zvi is very positive about. I don't think that is obviously risk-free. I think jailbreaking and tinkering with the models is likely to probably be capability work. In theory, it's possible that you could do something directly bad, but I don't think that's very likely. I think in general, the thing you should do here is AI safety research. And so Zvi ends with the observation that without AGI, we should expect 100% mortality rate. So you should remember that you will die with Memento Mori. And I think Memento Mori is in the second person, like you will die. And I think that is in fact very unlikely at this point. Like you singularly dying. I think at this point, either everybody is going to die or practically no one is going to die. That is at least my take on the overall situation. That is all for today. Thank you and see you next time.